What's so
No,
funny?
I'm just trying to set up my stuff. I'm out here in another room as my neighbors slash roommates are just waking up, and so it's I'm hearing them. I'm one. My point is possibly we'll have some music in the background later.
Fantastic.
They're,
Fantastic. Some ambient music from the neighbors of Shane Bugby.
yeah, there are new collaborators. Or breaking dishes. We don't know yet. We'll see what happens. Or fighting.
It will be like pre television radio, the sounds of footsteps from shoes and broken dishes and all kinds of sound effects.
Yes, exactly.
Fantastic. What are we talking about today?
Well, I guess we're talking about interviews.
Yes.
The
And
art of
here
the
I am interviewing you about your interviews and how you got to interview other people and create an art form of interviews, which I can't help but say every time I've heard more interviews from you, every time I've read new interviews that I discover that you've done in the past, I feel more inspired to interview you even further. I never saw myself as an interviewer, and I never thought I would become someone interviewing someone else, and I really enjoy it. So let's get on into it. This podcast is based around the history and experiences of the infamous Shane Bugby, recollected and retold by Shane Bugby himself. Who is Shane? Well, you're about to find out. I'm your host, Nannerl, and this is Speak of the Devil. Why did you start interviewing people?
Well, because I saw it in People magazine. So when I first did a zine, it was all about I want to do something for what I saw in front of me, which I could say now is a culture, but I didn't understand that. And I wanted to interview those people just like People magazine did. And as that started to that started to unfold, I was like, I chased it, and I understand now. It's hard to say I knew it then because I didn't. But I understood then that I was quenching my thirst of knowledge, that occult knowledge. I was going out getting mouth to ear education that wasn't written in books, that wasn't available in school. School was boring to me, but interviews weren't. And so it was really cool to talk to people about more than I don't do interview. Seldom do I do interviews that are about the person and what they're selling versus I do interviews about the person and their philosophies and their thoughts on, like when I spoke to Tommy Chong, let's say, it was all about growing weed and weed legalization and stuff like that. So, I remember this one interview when I was young, Old Skull. It was a group of kids. They were young. They were like 10 years old, 12 years old, and they were doing a punk rock band. And I went to interview them, and they were so brutal to me. It was hard for me to print the interview, but it was that one moment of where I was able to be vulnerable in my zine. That was one of the first moments of me being vulnerable because they just ripped into me like little kids do. Anyway, you learn a lot from interviews, and that's where I got my PhD in underground. It was from my not only my experiences, but part of my experiences are hanging out with people that I admire or want to know more about or don't like, but I want to understand their side of things. And I like the concept of there's no dumb question. Like you hear from teachers like, oh, this might be a dumb question.
I love there are no dumb questions. I absolutely love it. It's gathering that occult knowledge includes questioning everything. And if you question everything, it includes what some people call a dumb question. Totally.
And that was the most empowering thing by a young teacher, junior high teacher, was that when she said that to me, I was like, okay, well, she said there's no dumb questions and she's a teacher, so that must be true. And so I never felt dumb about asking questions.
When you wrote Elvis and Me in elementary school, did you ever imagine interviewing Elvis when you went to go eat at Sambo's?
Oh, yes. I imagined living with Elvis. I imagined Elvis being my father. I imagined us making peanut butter and banana sandwiches. I imagined being on his jet. Boy, Elvis is a big part of my imagination, or was.
The idea of interviewing is quite interesting. We've come through such a long evolution of interviews. You come from the pre-internet, well, age of zines, but you also are part of the early internet and the first podcasts. We think of interviews as, well, for myself, I think of, Howard Stern, and then also, Barbara Walters, Wolf Blitzer. Just, there's such a wide spectrum of it. And it seems like you've actually covered quite a wide spectrum of interviewers. And for yourself as an interviewer, did you ever have a specific influence to how you wanted to interview, or did this evolve over time?
Well, my influence is probably always rebellion. So when I have where I get my education is, like I said, what's in front of me. So it was like heavy metal magazines, People magazines, and I would see how they would interview people. Oh, I would say Seconds magazine out of New York. It's old school magazine.
Yes.
When they did interviews, it was 15 pages long. It was not like,
yes.
Right. It was not like these edited 2-page, 3-page interviews. So that was really exciting to me. But before that, it was just like I'd read these interviews in heavy metal magazines, and I'm like, fuck those interviews. I'm going to ask about their toothpaste. What toothpaste do you use? What's your favorite cheese? Because those questions they're probably maybe typical now, but they weren't being asked in the day. So I was asking the weirdest questions that were not being asked to these people. And a lot of times I would get the comment like, this is a great interview. It's not as boring as most interviews that keep asking me the same questions, or that was a good question, or these are great questions. So I really kept trying to have the great questions that would get me seen by King Diamond or Phil from Pantera or whatever,
It seems like a lot of magazine interviews, especially in the mainstream, have a tendency of the interviewer stroking their ego and talking to themselves a lot of times, or talking about what they're doing, like, oh, I just adjusted my coat as I walked into blah, blah, blah. And it's very, I'm going to use the word, this sounds so pretentious, but Miltonian. It reminds me of the author John Milton, who wrote Paradise Lost, who likes to talk about himself throughout this story and glorify himself, even though he's retelling the story of Adam and Eve. And to me, it's very much like that, the modern interviewer. Your form of interviewing, where you ask people, what kind of cheese you like or something like that, is actually a pioneer to, shows on not MTV, shows on Adult Swim, shows like the Eric Andre show. He becomes this man on the street and bugs the shit out of people, or he went to both political parties' conventions during the election and talked to all kinds of people and bugged the shit out of them and asked them weird questions as an observer. That even if he accidentally did this but the same manner, it does sort of come from your roots, which is so funny to me because we've talked about Mike Diana and his influences to Super Jail. And even the Kraft Punk interview, which is a spin-off of Eric Andre's show, where this character named Kraft Punk, who is as orange as this water bottle I'm showing you, interviewed people, including our favorite Dougie, and asked very annoying questions, but kind of pulls out their true character, even though that's absurdist humor. Thank you, Shane. Thank you for that, because those are the kind of interviews I love to watch.
Oh, that's great. Well, there's 2 points there I have to make. Like,
of course,
sometimes I have used people that I'm interviewing as a jumpstart to talk about myself. And it happens.
So do I. This entire 3 seasons, if you skip out all the Shane parts, you can learn a lot about my life.
Exactly. So it's like it's something that happens in a conversation. And so I like to do my interviews in a conversation like we're having now. And of course, you're going to interject your opinions in there. And that sort of happens. And sometimes I'll go overboard. I'll be too excited and I'll talk over people and I won't hear them. And I'm interviewing them, but I'm I'm the only one fucking talking. Number two, okay, I remember when the Occupy movement happened. And I went out and filmed it right away. Like the first stuff, I was filming it. And I would go down there and it was like I was met with, and I'm a left-wing person. Like I'm far left. And I'm there in support of them. But yet I'm getting opposition because of my questions. Because I would ask this. I would ask these kids, would you work at Walmart? And they're like, what does that mean? And I'm like, well, I'm wondering how you live your politics. Like, we're talking about corporations, corporate greed, stuff like that. So do you give your money to the enemy? Would you work for them? And they were so offended. No one knew how to answer the question. There was only a few people who knew how to answer the question. They were purists. And it was a guy from the Black Bloc, an anarchist from the Black Bloc. And you can find these Occupy videos on my Vimeo page. And then there was like Angela Fairless from Seaside, Oregon. She was able to answer it and laughed at me and stuff like that. But most people were like, oh, you're an enemy. You're with the right side. You're with the right. Because I'd asked that question because it was making them look bad, I guess. And I wasn't. I was just like, honestly, that came from the heart. It wasn't even trying to provoke them, but it was like, I have a problem living my politics. It's hard to live your politics as a purist. It's hard not to go into Starbucks or go into a Walmart sometimes. Or Target, you know. I go to thrift stores often, but sometimes I go to Target, I got to admit, you know, it's the way it is. And it's hard to avoid those things in our culture. And like the Black Bloc guy said, well, would I work for Walmart? Yeah, I would work for Walmart, but I would, if I have to earn a living, I'm going to work for whoever I have to. But I still won't support them. You know, so he was able to answer it.
But at least he attempted to answer it. As much as, you know, I hear that and I can see why the defensiveness shows up, because you can see a lot of holes in that. And so I think that as a journalist, you were sort of henpecked as the opposition because you may expose something that they didn't want to see in themselves or show other people.
Oh, yeah. In downtown Portland, I'm filming, and this one kid was asking a question and they ignored him. So I went and asked him, I went and said, say what you were going to say that they were yelling at you about. And he's like, I'm pissed off that they're putting flags on that statue. I came up here when I was a kid. He was drunk, but he's like, I'm from Oregon. I come here and as a child, I would love that statue with my father. And they're up there being assholes about it. And I'm offended by it. And so that's all it was. But people on the other side, they were pulling at me saying, don't interview him. Don't talk to him. And I had to turn around and actually tell some guy, he kept touching me. I'm like, dude, do not touch me again. And he touched me again. I said, one more time. And I pushed my camera through your teeth. Like, I will fight back. Don't touch me. Because it scares me when people touch me in an aggressive way. So Chicago, the reaction is to get ready to go. And so it was amazing. I couldn't believe people were reacting in such a strong way about someone asking a question and someone answering a question. It was like, what in the fuck? You know, like, and I had to tell people at some point, listen, the magic's in the edit. If I choose to edit you like a moron, you're going to look like a moron no matter how smart you answer this.
Ooh, there's another not directly Adult Swim, but very closely related because a lot of shows from Super Deluxe ended up on Adult Swim. Vic Berger. The magic is in the editing. And another thing that you may have paved the way or helped make way for interviewers like that who take editing and like take it almost too far to add a focus on something crazy or absurd. So that's excellent to hear.
Oh, Nannerl, I really love hearing this stuff because I don't notice that, but it's nice at this point to live to an age to see our culture's influence, whether it's mine or other people or who knows, someone else has to go back in time and date all this stuff. But I never wanted to live to this age. When you're young, I was living fast and die young. That was my idea. But now I'm old and I really want to live a lot longer. But it's cool to see that, like that you had a part of something that is reverberating in younger cultures.
It definitely maybe is something observed because of we are a generation difference. And these are influences that I love. And I could never have the guts to be that way. But these are people that I absolutely love what they do. So it makes me very happy to hear that someone I'm interviewing actually may have paved the way for those people to do what they do. It's very interesting that sometimes when you interview someone, you get stigmatized as a certain way. For example, I'm curious, the people in the Occupy movement, did they know who you were?
No.
Okay.
No.
So they didn't know about your Radio Jihad time or your Radio Free Satan time with the Aryan King. Okay.
No.
So I was about to say maybe they knew about that, but the fact that you're asking both sides, it always amazes me when people see that as wrong or they get very angry that you're asking two sides and they want to control the whole thing when they, even if they feel that way, saying that out loud is going to end up being what's published.
Right. And this kid this young man that was drunk saying what he was saying, he wasn't even on the other side. He was just a dumb drunk. And when I asked him, are you against this? Or he goes, no, I'm for that. I'm for that. So he was for most of what the Occupy movement was about. He just didn't like them defacing artwork. And that's what he said. He was like, I don't like people defacing artwork. And I'm like, I'm totally on your side, dude. And so he wasn't even on the other side, but they took him as that because he chose to disagree with one thing they were doing. So they were right away offended to it. It was like incredible to me, incredible ignorance.
Super relatable too. The idea of being shunned out or like even there's a term on Twitter called shadow banning and it happens in real life. And I feel like it's one of those things like a glitch in the matrix kind of thing. You asked questions and now you're invisible. And it sounds like this poor sap was cursed with that. And that's totally relatable. And I have to say that, and here I go talking about myself, doing these interviews with you is very therapeutic for all the times of not being heard out or taken seriously. While I'm taking you seriously and asking you questions, I do feel like I may understand why interviewing people is somewhat addictive.
Oh yeah, it's like that, isn't it? It's like occult knowledge. You can't get. You're
Yes.
you're pulling something out of someone's head. It's
Yes.
not in a book. And if you can get them to fumble sometimes, or you can get them to admit to something they never have, it's really cool. Like, and that's what I've struggled to do is really, I want to get to your soul. I want your soul, from interviewing. I want to collect your soul. And like when I went on that road trip for a year and started doing interviews, I saw it like that because the internet was so new. I was like, I need to gain as many stories on film as possible before these folks are empowered enough to tell their own story.
Oh,
because I collect a piece of their soul. I own it now. I've been a part of like Dennis Banks' life, and the guy from American Indian Movement. Like I interviewed him and it was like, holy shit, I just stepped into history and now I've become part of his history.
yes. Let's step on into some of your interview history now. Let's go a little before that time period to before you started collecting souls, but you were kind of getting your footing in this. When did you start interviewing?
Well, I wish I could remember the year, but it was like Naked Aggression, the first one. I think that says 1991.
Uh-huh.
possibly. And so that would be the first time I started to ask questions, and it was just like a question that I would put in a music review, or I asked a question of Tipper Gore and the PMRC, and just it was one question. I was just looking for a quote for the article, so that sort of kicked it off.
What kind of people did you get interviews with or pursue besides
Well,
Tipper?
in Naked Aggression, what I could remember is Tommy Chong and the in Guy Gee from Fugazi. And
Hmm.
those were two phenomenal things for me because I love them. I love both Fugazi and I love Cheech and Chong. It was great watching Cheech and Chong growing up, and that was probably one of the greatest moments in my life. Tommy Chong interview.
So, what kind of things do you talk to Tommy Chong with?
Oh fuck! So Tommy Chong is his career's on, the career in entertainment ebbs and flows, it ups and downs. So he was on a downturn where people didn't care, and he was playing a small comedy club in a suburb. And I kept bothering the comedy club owner, and I needed this interview, and I got it. And I just acted professional, like I acted like a journalist. And so Tommy Chaw, I go there. They say, come here at this time. We go in the back room, and I'm in a back room with Tommy Chong for 2 hours. And we're talking and hanging out. And it's like, I can't fucking believe this. But then he pulls out a cigarette pack full of joints that people have given him, all these different joints. And he lights a joint and hands it to me, then lights another joint and smokes on it. And then he passes me that joint, and I pass him the joint I have. And so we're passing these joints back and forth. And in the interview, you hear it. Like at some point in this interview, and I have it on record, and it's like on archive.org somewhere. In this interview, I'm like, what did I ask? He's like, what did you ask? We're so, yeah. You hear the smoke. It's like we are smoke damaged. We are like fucked up and stoned. And I cannot tell you how, just thinking back on it, I am so thrilled about that moment because it's like, I was like, Jesus Christ, it was 30 years ago. I was like 21 years old, maybe even 20. And I'm interviewing this guy where I first got stoned watching Cheech and Chong. I'm interviewing the guy, not only interviewing him, we're smoking weed. We are fucked up.
It's a
And
Chongception.
yeah. And he was so cool. He held up, like I did this t-shirt. It was said, just do it. And it was like a mock off of the Nike logo, just do it. And it was a joint with smoke going up. And it's been really widely bootlegged, but I did that. And Tommy Chong held it up and took a picture for me so I could sell it, like, so he even did a plug, like I was able to take a picture of him and use it in advertising. So it was such a neat thing. It was almost like the Ghetto Boys interview. Like I was they credit me as the first white guy to interview the Ghetto Boys. And that's where they took off. But those are the Naked Aggression interviews I remember. Gee, Ghetto Boys, Tommy Chong.
What kind of experience was it interviewing Ghetto Boys as, I guess, as a white person?
Well, I didn't go in as a white. They just kept telling me this, but Rick Rubin, Deaf America, was publishing them, and I was friends with them. I was friends with Rick Rubin. I talked to him on the phone when he just started his company. Wild to say that, to even have those words come out of my mouth, but it's true. I sent him a Christmas card with glitter in it once, and I called their office, and he got me. He goes, "Don't ever do that again."
Did you glitter bomb him, you mean?
I guess so. Yeah.
Wow, that's a pioneering act, too. Now you can pay companies money to send boxes of glitter. It's called a glitter bomb, and you open it up, and it gets all over the place.
Oh, I sent him a Christmas card, and the glitter was piled in there, and I guess he's like, "Don't ever do that again. Don't send me glitter. It's in my keyboards. It's all over the place. I can't get rid of it, and I hate fucking glitter." And then he sends me back to his secretary, and that was fine. And they sent me a Slayer jacket. So I don't know.
That sounds like the best reaction for an irritating moment ever.
Yeah. It's funny. It's glitter, and he's angry. But anyway, fucking that was wild. Isn't that wild? So anyway, Ghetto Boys. So I called Rick Rubin's, company, the Deaf America, and they won't set up an interview with me. They're like, they won't interview. They're too hardcore. It's dangerous for you. don't do that, and it was like wild. And so I said, fuck this. I saw it was Rap-A-Lot Records, and I looked 411. We didn't have the internet. So I had to call 411 in Houston and say, is there a phone number for Rap-A-Lot Records? And there was. And I called them, and she's like, oh, we'd be thrilled to set up an interview with you. And they would send me boxes of CDs because they put out like a CD a day from different hip hop artists. So they were loving this because they were like, this is outside of their culture. They want to branch out. And so they hooked me up with an interview with the Ghetto Boys, and I sat in a room for an hour with the 3 original Ghetto Boys. Well, not the 3 original, I should say, Bushwick Bill, Scarface, and Willie D. And it was intimidating when I got there, my naivete left the room, and I was like, holy shit, I'm in a serious situation, because it was all people of color. I was the only white guy at this place in this neighborhood and walking into the show, and people were looking at me hard, and I was like, oh shit. And so I go in, but I'm with the band, so I go in there and we talk, and it was great. It was fucking great. Like later, like Scarface uses a line called "Screaming for Vengeance," "Screaming for Vengeance" out of the Judas Priest song, and that comes from our conversation. Also, I sent Bushwick Bill and him the Dahmer police report, and Bushwick Bill thanked me later and wrote a song about it. So it was like really neat. Looking back, it's really neat. And I remember one memory, Scarface is like, I said, what was that you just said? And he goes, you got to move the fucking hair from your ears, dude. You can't hear, because I had long hair. And he's like, you got to move that hair out from in front of your ears. So they would make jokes, and like jokes about being a white boy or whatever and stuff like that. And it was cool. But then when it was over, they're like, you're going to stick with us. We want to make sure you don't have any problems here tonight, because I'm with a hardcore crowd. So I was on stage with the Ghetto Boys. Willie D made me walk on stage with them. I sat on the side of the stage, and I remember I'm standing by some of their friends, and this guy, this brother looks at me, and he's like, he's smoking a joint, and I'm like, hey, I'll take some of that. And he goes, you best not be 5-0, motherfucker. You best not be 5-0.
Wow.
And he hands me the joint, and I puff it real quick, and I inhale, and I give it back. He's like, yeah. And then we were good. We were dancing. It was good. And I remember at one point, I'm like, and I got, I think, parachute pants on or some fucking baggy, fucking shitty pants.
Nice.
But I walk across the stage. I'm going to walk on stage with the Ghetto Boys. So because everyone's like going out there dancing once in a while. So I do that. I'm like, yeah. And I got pictures. I had someone take pictures of me doing it. So it's like that. But Willie D made me come on stage with them, and he escorted me out of the building. He's like, are you safe? He made sure I was safe, walked me to his car. And it was great. It was like right out of a movie or something. Because Willie D, he's got this jean jacket on with the airbrush on the back, says Gangster Love. And he's with 2 women as he goes, see you later, Shane. And he puts his arm around two and walks down the alley.
Floats on off. Wow, that's so surreal. This is an interview experience. I feel like young white men who do interviews for Pitchfork, etc., just they wish for this. Oh, yeah. This is something that so many people wish would happen. I'm envious. I wish that would happen to me. That's just beyond surreal and admirable.
Totally, and it's like when they're starting, so you don't know they're going to be part of a cultural landscape at the time. You have no idea at this age what's going to survive, and it's sort of surprising what's survived. Like black metal is 25, 30 years old, and people are into it like as classic rock. But with that story, like Rap-A-Lot then started sending me a ton of shit, started sending me money for advertising because I interviewed them, and Rap-A-Lot knew this, and I didn't. But this was that they knew. If they can get this white boy to interview him, other white boys will interview him. And that was true. Then the Chicago Tribune interviewed him right after I did.
You were the canary.
What?
You were the canary.
Yeah, the big fish eats the small fish. And so the Tribune came in and interviewed the Ghetto Boys, and they branched into the white boy culture, or whatever you want to say, or the white I don't know how to explain that in a.
Oh no, it's the evolution into where we are now, where the mumble rap culture, the newer, Travis Scott, etc. It's the white kids getting mad that Marilyn Manson was on the bill during the Travis Scott tour. the white kids wearing Yeezys and things like that, being into Jay-Z. It's an evolution from what you experienced, what you paved the way for. Good job.
Yeah, well,
Very
when
nice.
MTV popped on, and we're in the middle of suburbia, white suburbia, and Public Enemy came on there. Like, I bought a Public Enemy T-shirt right away. I was like, "Fucking, this is great!" It was so weird and wild, and telling such a story I'd never heard before. Like, I'd never heard this side of this. And that was the occult knowledge, though, getting kicked from Public Enemy. They were telling you stuff that wasn't in any books, and then they're saying 911 is a joke. 911 is a joke. And you're like, why? But, then we're at the concept now of white privilege and privilege. And so you start to get a grasp of that. Public Enemy was the first person to start to explain that to me, and I also saw Beach Street and stuff like that. So it just turned me on to that culture, where
Yes.
I wanted to know more because I didn't know anything about it. But it's the same as when I interviewed a Nazi and a Klansman. I wanted to know more about what they were doing because I didn't know anything about it, and I wasn't going to trust all my friends' opinions on it. I'm just going to go ask the source.
It doesn't make any sense to only interview people you agree with.
Right.
While you and I agree as friends a lot of times, there are a lot of things that I don't know that you know a lot of, and vice versa, etc.
Yeah.
And so I think those disagreements create interest. And I mean, look at Fox, look at CNN. Conflict is why we watch.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's good that you interviewed both sides of the spectrum.
Yeah, and interviews are also a form of incrimination. It's an incriminating thing to put your opinions down in audio or words, and then 20 years later have to go, well, my views sort of changed, as we've talked about in these episodes, like with my Radio Free Satan stuff or whatever. Your opinions evolve, but those interviews are static, and so it's like free speech is almost a form of incrimination. When you decide to be honest about what you're feeling, you are incriminating yourself. That's what's happening there, and I sort of like interviews for that reason too. It's like a sliver of honesty if you can do the interview without worshiping the person you're interviewing, like actually want to ask them hard questions, which I've done and made a lot of enemies, like with the West Memphis 3 people. I did an interview on the road, and this guy he's like, well, he's raising money for the West Memphis 3, and he slips and he tells me about how the lady gave him back the money that he raised for the guys in prison so he could fly in and be a part of this documentary. And I'm like, wait, tell me more about this money trail again. And he does on video, and I publish it. And then the West Memphis 3, like Damien Eccles is commenting from prison, like, please keep sending us money. It became a controversy. And I sort of felt bad about it, but I didn't, because it was just an honesty came out. But I'm on the West Memphis 3 side. You see what I'm saying? But it caused problems in that whole thing. And are you familiar with the West Memphis 3?
Not very. Please indulge.
Well, there were kids that were, it was like a satanic panic thing where they were prosecuted for a crime that they say they didn't commit, and it doesn't look like they did. There's DNA evidence that points to some other people. And they were convicted based on their having a satanic Bible or liking Metallica, stuff like that. And there was John Byers is in the movie, this guy, John Mark Byers. And when I was there, I got to interview him, and we go to his trailer, and it's like rebel flags as we're driving into it. All these through the neighborhood. It's a heavy neighborhood. And there's angry dogs walking around. And anyway, we're in his trailer, and he's giving me this interview because his son is one of the sons who got killed. And then they started blaming him. So we're there with a person who's had his son killed.
I know what you're talking about now, but do go on. I forgot what it was called, and when you said that, now I know. Please go on.
Yeah, his son was murdered, and his wife died at an early age because of the stress. So I'm there interviewing him, and that's a heavy moment, to talk to someone about their murdered son. And he goes, "You can talk to me at my home in my neighborhood." And so I'm in peril if I fuck up there. Like, I can't get out. And this guy was suspected of maybe being the murderer. And fuck, that was an interview, man. That was an interview because he's like, you see that knife on the wall and that deer? I killed that deer with that knife after my son was murdered. I hid in the trees and waited for the deer to come by. And he's telling me, I'm like, oh, fuck. Oh, fuck. Like,
This
you know.
isn't helping him at all. It's just making him sound menacing.
Right, right. But the interviews were good. He liked them because he called out the filmmakers that made the West Memphis Three as being liars. And Joe Berenger and I interviewed them too. And so they really were upset by the interviews, but they weren't as artists because there was a lot of truth to it. So they had to fix that in the other versions, they brought John Byers in there and made him look a little better because he was angry how he was portrayed, and as well he should have been. And so I know that I influenced the end of that filming. I helped out John Byers because he got to tell his story in an interview that wasn't edited to make him look like a murderer, but edited to tell his truth. Because when I did those interviews, I felt a desperate need to present people as they wanted to be presented when they, and yes, I could have edited those videos into anything I wanted, but I chose to listen to the person and listen and understand what they were feeling. I wanted to put that feeling into what I gave you, the consumer. And so when I did that for John Byers, it worked out for him. It worked out for him well. And it was great when I left his house because we're on this road trip and we don't have money and all this stuff. He gives me a big 5-pound salami for like one of those things you get for a Christmas gift.
Yeah.
An ounce of weed, some canned food, a book.
Wait, what kind of canned food?
Just like stuff you could pop open and eat on the road. Like
Right. But was it good canned food or was it stuff that people food drive because they bought on impulse?
Food drive.
Alrighty.
It was that, yes, exactly.
It's the thought that counts.
Yes, and it was like the salami he got from the food pantry or something like that. But it was the thought that counts, and I ate the salami on the road.
I'm guessing this is a blue collar man.
Oh yeah, it was a trailer park.
So these gifts are actually quite valuable, and they sound like they are very well meaning.
Yeah. Oh yeah, he loved us. He was cool with us. He was a good guy. And that was an honor that he shared himself with me so honestly.
Do you think as an interviewer, you learn how to understand different kinds of people with your experiences?
Well, I do. I don't think all interviewers do. I think a lot of interviewers are in it just to do an interview with someone famous so they can get their name out there.
They just want their face implanted everywhere, you think?
Right. When you said something earlier, and it's like when the interviewer starts talking about themselves, and it's sort of like when it's a conversation, it's different. But some people in that same regard are like looking to be the rock star that they're interviewing. Like
they all think they're Howard Stern or Adam Carolla.
Right. Because I interviewed this rock star, I am a star. And so they get this attitude. For me, when I interview, I'm going there to learn something about them. So I'm going to ask them hard questions or questions that might be offensive normally. Like I might ask them cultural questions that most white people wouldn't have the guts to ask. Like I'm just going to ask. Like I asked, I just thought about this. In the South, there's a black man we were interviewing in a slave area where it was built by slaves and they were all slaves and they had their houses given to them by the master and stuff like that. And he was a descendant of that. And I asked him about the lawn jockey. Yes. And it was like, a lot of people were like, how the fuck can, I told some people I was going to ask that before and they're like, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that. And I'm like, well, I want to know what his point of view is on the lawn jockey. A lot of white people have these black lawn jockeys out in front, and I don't know what they are, but they look like it's a racial thing. So he explained it to me. He goes, those lawn jockeys were actually something that was put out there to let people know when slaves were running that they could come to that house. And they could hide.
You wouldn't have known that if you didn't ask and you just took those assumptions from other white people who are concerned.
Right, and he says it maybe has morphed into something else, but originally that was what it is, and in Southern culture, that's how people see it.
I think a lot of people objectified it perhaps later on out of speculation, it sounds like. Kind of
Right.
like when someone's well-meaning and then it becomes toxic.
Right, when I asked him that question, he didn't flinch to answer it. I asked and I watched, like, is he going to look at it like I'm offended? Like, is his face, like I watched the face, and is he going to jump back and be offended and then answer? No, he just went right into answering it like he was talking to someone at the bar or something. Didn't bother him at all like it bothered the white people around me. So I'm going to ask what's on my mind. And if it upsets you, I'm going to apologize and just let you know. I was just curious. I don't mean to offend you. I can't help my curiosity.
No, and I think that your upbringing, you ran away from home, you lived with a black family.
Oh, yeah.
So you learned firsthand a set of conversation skills and a culture of talking about race that you did not originally grow up with. Generally, white people don't talk about race. And because of just circumstances where a lot of us are learning about now, I know this, you know this, but a lot of America is learning how to have these conversations for the first time because we've been told that it's almost worse than talking about sex half the time. And so there you go, another trailblazing you're doing.
Do you think it's awkward for people to talk about like sex or race because there's a guilt element there?
Yes.
Yeah, because, okay, great.
I think also it's a little bit of discomfort of not knowing how where the conversation's going to go. I think it's ultimately the fear of unknown, not necessarily a guilt, though. And there's a lot of defensiveness over, don't be ashamed, don't be guilty, which I completely agree with. But I think that the fear of reaction freaks a lot of people out because there are now adults put into a situation they didn't have to stumble through as children.
I almost feel like my observation of like white people with that is it's almost like with what you said, I agree. But I was also thinking maybe there's a layer of subconscious guilt, like they know better. They know if I'm going to talk about race, I've got to admit privilege. If I'm going to talk about my sexuality, I got to admit I do like my butt played with, or my, like they got to admit something that's just awkward.
A quick segue before I say what I think of that. Yesterday I invented a startup company called it's called Pooter. It's kind of like Uber, but if you're still nervous about getting that prostate exam and you need someone to put your finger up your butt and you don't want to ask your friend because that's weird, you can call Pooter. We won't tell anyone.
I'm going to employ Pooter every day.
Yes, Pooter. Just for everybody. One at a time, though. Money up front. One of the reasons
Oh, goodness. You know what? That idea is going to sprout now. You've just planted a seed. We're going to see a startup company starting that.
I'm not a good business person, and if someone starts this up, this might actually promote a lot of sex positivity. And
Yes.
So I'm all for spreading occult knowledge and for our world getting better and doing less harm. So if someone wants to take that idea, fucking steal it. I won't sue you. Just do it. It might make the world a better place. Pooter, we're helping you.
Probably the nucleus of occult knowledge is the prostate. Like that's where it all comes.
So I disagree with what you're saying about the guilt thing only because as an Asian person, a lot of Asian people are also sometimes uncomfortable with talking about race. Not everybody, but at least amongst a lot of Japanese Americans I have been or was friends with or am friends with, a lot of conversation is uncomfortable. And I think it has to do with, again, fear of it going left field a lot of times because the idea of guilt does not come into play in those environments, in those conversations. So while it might come into play with white people, I don't know if that's necessarily true in all circumstances, including with white people. There's plenty of people that do not feel guilt, who just don't like the idea they might lose control over a conversation, or perhaps get into I think also we're in a time we're saying it's okay to talk about race, but we're also in a time period that we want to show everyone that we are practically an expert at everything. And this is one of those subjects that you can't be an expert at without experiences. And I think that's very uncomfortable for people without those experiences.
That makes sense. I was just, yeah, that makes sense totally.
I think on both sides, having no pretense is fantastic. I think what I've heard from your questions, you have approached them without pretense, and that's why you got answers without any fight put up. I think from a person of color's side as well, the patience for someone having no pretense, or at least expecting no pretense, is very helpful for opening that portal to a good conversation. As you and I've talked about Ice Cube using the word, what was it, a learning moment?
Yes.
And those learning moments, you need that mutual consent. It is a consent culture in its own way. And I think interviews in general have a culture of consent that's not always talked about, but it can be pushed in a different way that sexuality does not have.
Yes.
So let's move forward now to, before we move forward though, I did want to say about the Tommy Chong interview and you guys getting baked. You are another pioneer in this because I think of Joe Rogan getting Elon Musk stoned. He wouldn't be doing this without that. He gives everyone a chance, gives them a platform to say their thing, whether you like him or not. And I bet you he likes you.
Well, I've had run-ins with Joe Rogan's people and him, and so that may be true. Like we did, and I did do anything I could do to make the interview different. When I was looking at People magazine or heavy metal magazines, the only one that was, I felt like I said earlier, ahead of their time was Seconds magazine, where they were printing the entire fucking interview, every fucking word that was spoke. It wasn't edited at all. And that was really cool to me. That's what I wanted in an interview. So they were doing something original. And then I wanted to brand. I didn't do any of that because we just didn't have the resources to print a full interview. We had to edit it down. But I did want to do something different and ask different questions. I didn't want to ask, where'd you get your band name? Because it's already been answered a million times.
Yep.
Where'd the influence for that song come from? Fuck
and then
that.
you speak over the interviewer, just like how I did. You speak over the interviewee to say what you think the song should have been, and that it compares to this because I studied one fucking class of Music 101 or something like that, so I'm gonna flex my knowledge.
Yeah. All right. Or how it meant, this is the song I'm going to have at my funeral. It's just because, right. It's like, so I didn't want to do those things that I read in any question that was asked in like a People magazine or a heavy metal magazine, anything I saw, I'm like, I'm not asking that. I'm going to ask them about, tacos or what the fuck ever, like something else, like World War II. Like, what's your favorite battle in World War II if they're a death metal band singing about war, let's say, or gore? I'm going to talk to them about those subjects or try to get something deeper or different. I want to have the interview that's original, that no one else has. Like, I remember when I asked Phil from Pantera, I asked him a bunch of questions about Might Is Right, all this stuff. And then I asked him, Phil, what's the worst worst rumor that's gone around about you? And I had some other things in mind, but he's like, that I'm gay. That's the worst rumor. Like, what do I got to do? Fuck everyone's girlfriend to prove I'm not gay? And it was like, but it was cool because he was vulnerable in that moment. He put out what was the worst, like I thought that was like, I'm like, holy shit, that's a weird, yeah, wow. Okay, Phil. But he ended the interview again saying it was a cool interview. Like, that was cool. Like, I'm bored. I hate interviews because they ask the same questions. You did not. Asked about Might Is Right. He's like, it's a good book, but there's a lot of good books. when I interviewed King Diamond, it was the same era. I tried to make jokes with King Diamond, and he didn't laugh. Like he's like, I'm like, so is a funeral a funeral to you? Something like that. Like, he's like, he's like, excuse me, and I'm like, is a funeral funeral to you? And he just sat silent, and I'm like, I guess not.
That's
Okay,
a talent. That was a good dad joke. I've never heard that one.
Well, at the time I was 20 or something, so I wasn't a dad. I guess it's dad joke today. Back in the day, that was a hot one. No, I'm joking.
But that's a very 20-year-old interviewer sort of thing, is stump the professor is what I call those. And that was a form of stump the professor. I'm sure that you've been interviewed by people who played stump the professor, just trying to push you of what do you don't know? How can I catch you in a hole? And to be honest, I think those people interact with people generally in that manner. Those people who do that.
As far as I've been interviewed a lot. And so like, I understand, like, if I'm going to go on a morning show and the producer's like, we have a segment to fill. That's 8 minutes. It's a long time. I go, I can fill a segment. I can fill 4 segments. And so they'll go, okay, book you. And so I'll answer in sound bites. We don't have a conversation like we're having. I'll answer in sound bites. And if someone is looking to be mean to me, I look them up. I research anyone who's going to interview me. And so I sort of understand where they're coming from. So I'm ready for them. I'm ready for the fight, and I'll try to rip them down. If it's a print interview where they're going to have control of editing, it's not live, I definitely watch my words, and I try to record any interviews that are going to be edited. So when they are edited, I can say this is actually what was said. Because I understand how it is to be edited in a poor way and have your words taken out of context, which is, I guess we're in that day and age where people will take your words out of context totally just to cancel culture you or whatever you want to say, whatever the word is. Grandpa's trying to figure it out.
Another thing that Grandpa has done that is happening a lot now is that association with who you interview or what you're interviewing for seems to scar a lot of people, or it seems like outside people decide to credit who is and who isn't a journalist based on academics rather than merits. And it's interesting that you've had a handful of enviable experiences as an interviewer, not just as a publisher, as an interviewer, and you are a high school dropout.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. When I interviewed the state's attorney of Illinois that put Gacy to death about Gacy, he said, I'm a journalist. I'm a pure journalist. And that was one of the first times someone had said that to me, where I wasn't just a high school dropout trying to do a zine. He took me as a serious interview and answered seriously. That was cool. That was monumental in my psyche, my psychology of understanding. Yeah, I am a journalist. I'm asking questions, and I do care enough to give my time to a person I'm interviewing. So I do care about their time, and I want to present it. I want heart and soul. I want that. I want feeling. I don't just want words. I want truths.
Let's go on to a handful of truths here. You were on You're at the Wheel, which is a documentary you created side by side with a book. I guess you called it a boovie. And it was later on called Suffering is Celebration. And you had a lot of very significant people on it. I've seen snippets of this, as well as the companion piece called Shunned, which is sort of a predecessor to it, but it does have a lot of the same kind of key players in it. So let's talk about some of them. Let's start with the biggest one, John Sinclair. Oh,
wow. Yeah, John Sinclair was cool because I have a history with his friends. I've met him before at the Bucktown Pub. He's a person who created punk rock through his putting together the MC5. Kick out the jams, motherfuckers. And they were part of riots and stuff like that. So it was really it was really neat to hear myself in him. Like, it was every reason I could, like, I'm talking to him, and it's the same reason I did a zine. I turned my back on society and I wanted to document my culture. So when I'm asking him this, he's like, we turned our back on society. And I'm like, hey, me too. Like, in my head, like thinking, yeah, I did too. And so it was really neat to hear him talk about things. And he was so fucking honest. Like, he's like, people talk about revolution, but revolution is cutting off the bankers' heads and putting their heads on pikes. That's what a revolution is. And I'm like, holy shit, you know? and yeah, it was really neat because he's a White Panther. He worked with he worked with Fred Hampton. He worked with the Black Panthers. It's neat to walk into history like that. It's neat to fucking play with history. It's wild.
The way that he gives you information in your interviews with him are quite interesting because I hear a little bit of how you talk now in how he was then. And you as an interviewer during that time period it's still the same, Shane. I hear you, but you're definitely younger in it. And the way that you ask questions, you're quite agitating, whereas now you kind of sit back, and that's how John Sinclair presented himself.
Well, I guess that must come with age, you know, probably something like that. Like, and that was my listening tour. When I went around before that, I was a big, you know, big mouth talker, opinionated. And then I was like, oh, my whole philosophy's crumbling around me. I don't know where the truth is anymore. And so when I went on that tour, I was looking for a truth in philosophy. And so I was testing my philosophy and finding out where the flaws in it were and where I could improve it, where I could add to my philosophies. And that's what I think a philosophy is you add to it, you improve it, you challenge it. Or a philosophy becomes a religion where you follow it and you don't change it and you read it to the letter of the law. So I'm not into that. I'm into philosophical pursuits. And John Sinclair definitely imparted definitely impressed himself upon me in that moment. You are correct. There was something about him that was like regal. He was a royal member of the underground. So I had nothing but respect going into the interview. And when I left, I was like, wow, yeah, like I want to be like that guy when I grow up. Yeah, for sure. Like, for sure. And I got to do a tour with him, a mini tour of the Pacific Northwest with John, and hung out with him, and he'd stayed at my house and all this stuff. So it was I learned a lot from John. Now we don't talk anymore. On the way to drop him off at the airport, we got in a brutal fight in the car, and he turned around like he was going to punch me, and I put my padukes up too, like we were going to start fist fighting. And he goes, "You're a fucking punk!" And I have it recorded. I don't have the recording now,
That's
but
so funny because what is he known for?
Punk rock. So I was like, when he said that, my willingness to fight him deflated immediately. And I'm like, thank you for that gift in my head. Thank you.
You dropped your crown, King.
Yeah. Thank you for calling me a punk on audio, recording, yelling it at me. Thank you. What a fucking trophy. And then I just let it alone. And the fight was about money. Like, you know.
Did you guys ever ameliorate your terms, or are you guys still not on speaking term?
He got his money.
Okay.
But I don't think, I think we're still probably not on speaking terms. Because we had a fight. We had a disagreement in a brutal way, and that happens in underground circles and with people that are, John was couch surfing. He's couch surfing at 70 years old. He's got I feel for him. Mm-hmm. And I, when you're in that lifestyle, things can get hard and you can be hard. And so I love John Sinclair, and I would have bet you he would say the same thing about me.
That's nice to hear. That's nice to have on record here too.
I do love him, but disagreements are what they are.
Who are some other people you did some interviews with here? I've got Ian MacKaye. Who is Ian MacKaye?
Oh, my God. So when you say the biggest was John Sinclair, the first thing that came to my mind was the biggest for me was Ian MacKaye.
All righty.
And he started the DIY movement. Like, he's Ian MacKaye, the fucking Fugazi minor threat. Just, he's like, when people have posters up of Bob Marley, and it's great. He's did a lot and influenced a lot. All these things. Ian MacKay is a poster that will happen at some point. Like, he is just an amazing, influential person that influenced so much you couldn't even tell anymore. It's been blended into a culture. So he started the DIY movement. And along that road trip, there were road sages that we ran into. And it was crazy because they were able to answer my questions before I asked them. It was like, I'm about to ask a question. They're like, yeah, I know where you're going with this, kid. Boom, and they drop it down. Boom, they drop it down. Boom, they drop it down. And so Ian was one of those guys that just gave, oh my God, every answer, every word was perfect. It was like amazing. And it was amazing because it was inspirational and informative and educational. Like, it was like all of these things. And these are people who know how to do an interview. They know what they're facing and they know what they're going to say. I'm not sure I got a piece of his soul, or John Sinclair's who's the photographer? Joel Peter Whitkin.
Yes.
He was another road sage that was just knocked it down, but he was able to give me all the answers about art. He's just knocked it down. And those are professional interviewees, but they were road sages. They gave me answers that it was just incredible to have. And I was really searching for those answers. So I'm very lucky that I ran into them.
I would say that you're quite professional in the way that you are as an interviewee as well. It's quite nice that you did not turn out to be the interviewee that puts on sunglasses and lounges back in the couch and talks like this the whole time, trying to be Marilyn Manson being interviewed for Rolling Stone in the mid-90s, which actually a lot of alternative people are guilty of doing, I feel like.
Well, because I interviewed, I take it seriously. And I think this is where occult history and knowledge happens. People that have control over the printed word or the internet or big platforms, as we call them now, people have big platforms. They can rewrite history if you don't take history seriously enough to interview historic people or interview people that have a part of your culture. You're not protecting your culture. You're not protecting your people. You're not protecting your interests. So interviews serve to protect history, protect your individual interests, my individual interests. I'm trying to protect them by interviewing people. And so by the same token, when someone interviews me, I take it very seriously. I turn down interviews often because I don't think the people are serious. I look into them and I'm like, oh, this is just hype. And if I had something to sell at that moment, I'd take every interview available. But if I don't, I'm just not going to do it because a lot of times, because I see where the person's coming from. It's just an exploitation. It's a mutual exploitation. There's nothing about protecting history. There's no love there.
They're also holding your head as a trophy.
Right. Exactly. So yeah, I take it seriously. I love people who do interviews, and I love a good interview to read it. Like, fuck yeah. I love that. It's my thing.
Fantastic. There's some more names here that came with your year at the wheel that I wanted to talk about. You mentioned Dennis Banks. Who is Dennis Banks? You mentioned American Indian?
Yeah, American Indian movement, AIM. And so he was a person who, Dennis Banks was a person who was able to shoot at the feds and not go to jail. They had a standoff. It's not Ruby Ridge, sitting. I don't want to mispronounce it, so you have to Google it.
Okay.
They had a standoff at an Indian reservation where they were not going to let this part of land go, and they had a standoff with guns with the federales, and they won. And so Dennis Banks is a hero to me. And it was a great honor to be able to get an interview with him because he didn't do interviews with everyone. But I came to him with a jar of salsa and a bottle of rum, which I collected on the road trip to hand out to people that I was interviewing. And I gave the bottle of rum and salsa to his daughter and said, do you think here's an offering. I'd love to talk to Dennis, Mr. Banks. And she goes, I'll ask him. And so he came back and he sat down. He's like, I'd like another jar of that salsa.
Nice.
And I gave him another jar of the salsa. And he goes, you have 15 minutes. And we spoke. And when 15 minutes was up, that was it. He took a couple selfies with me and he was out. But it was from a non-spiritual person, it was spiritual. The guy was beautiful and had and he's part of history. So it was, and I didn't ask him I didn't ask him all the boring questions about his history. I asked him, do you vote? And that's something that was controversial online because he's like, no, I don't vote. We don't get our votes counted. And then when Obama was running the second time, that video was shared by people on the right saying, look at this guy doesn't vote. And then a bunch of Native Americans came out and was like, he votes. And he had to come out with a video saying, I indeed vote. So it was like he had to reply to his own. He did tell me, and it's on video, I don't vote. No. And then he had to come out and say, I vote and I believe in voting because the internet was new. So he didn't realize that his words were going to be shotgunned.
It's a nice example of the double standards also that marginalized people can face when they aren't being what others find as good, non-threatening representatives of minorities. He is a threatening minority because he stood his ground, and that's quite awesome.
And I was able to talk to him when he was doing the longest walk part 2, where they walked from California to DC. And it was beautiful. It was just beautiful. I met Andrew. Andrew spoke to me for the American Indian movement. And those interviews are up on A Year at the Wheel on YouTube. And it was just, I can't say how cool it was. It was just like Tommy Chong or anything else. Like, wow, this is amazing. I'm talking to you. Because I really respect the American Indian movement and what they did for us to this day.
Absolutely. The final name associated with You're at the Wheel, correct me if I'm wrong when I go through this list afterwards of other names, is going to be Forrest Ackerman. So,
he wasn't on A Year at the Wheel.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. Let's talk about Forrest Ackerman.
Oh, love it. So Forrest Ackerman was like 2006, I believe, and he used to have the Acker Mansion.
And it was full of dad jokes today.
Well, that was what he called. He called it Acker Mansion. So that was Forrest Ackerman, but he came up with the word sci-fi. So, sci-fi may have been originally a dad joke. Forrest Ackerman came up with this, and he had the Acker Mansion. And so he had to sell it off when his wife died, and he was in a house, and he had 2 caregivers there with him. And he invited people over on the weekends to see his collection. So you're able to see Dracula's Ring or things from Metropolis movie and stuff like that. And so it was great because I interview him and he's like, oh, I'd love to go out for a pie. And so we took him to the House of Pies. But before that, like he shows me his bedroom. And when people say you shit the bed, well, he shit the bed. And I hate to say this about him, but I got a picture of like poopy running down his bed.
Oh, no.
And right. I never published the photo, though. But I had it, and I was, like, in this mindset, like, if I publish this, in the day, the internet was just kicking, I'll be viral. Like, this will go. I never published it. I'm telling it now because it was a moment. Like, it was like, wow. But, yeah, everyone shits the bed. So that's just, no one's getting out of that one. And so we took him out for pie. He wanted to go to House of Pie for a slice of pie. And we're sitting there, and I'm trying to have small talk with him. And he says, I know what you want. And he looks at me, and I go, what do I want, Forey? And he goes, you want a whole coconut cream pie, not just a slice. And I said, why do you say that? He goes, I sat at this table, I sat in this chair, and you're sitting just where Orson Welles sat. And when Orson Welles would come here for pie with me, he would order a whole coconut pie. I know your kind. You want a whole coconut pie. I was like, oh, Forrest, you are so funny. So when I moved to L.A., I went there and ordered a whole coconut pie one time stone, thinking, I wanted to have this legend. Like if Orson
This is
Welles...
House of Pies on Vermont, right?
Right.
I sat and ate 4 pieces of pie with a friend who watched me eat in horror. and I was not stoned, but I ate 4 different pieces of pie out there. So I understand it's easy to do this.
Great pie.
Oh
Well,
yeah. And I am a cake person. I am not a pie person, and I enjoyed it. So this is Nannerl's endorsement that if you are in LA and you're looking for somewhere to eat that's not Mel's Diner because that's super overrated, go to House of Pie. Have some dessert.
Yeah, House of Pie rules, and they have a good stroganoff there when they serve it.
Yes.
Yeah, but I did order a pie there, thinking this is going to be my legend. I'm gonna not only get a pie, but I'm gonna get a pie and eat it, and then I'm gonna get a slice of pie on top of that. So I have a pie and a slice. So I beat Orson Welles in some way. I can beat him, and this is the way. Well, to tell you the truth, I never beat him because I ordered the pie and I couldn't finish it. So Orson Welles wins again.
Who else did you guys talk about? What kind of conversations did you have?
Oh, shit. So I bring up this sometimes to, so he's into sci-fi and horror and all this. So I'm going to drop LaVey's name, like boom. And I think we spoke about this before when I dropped LaVey's name to Clive Barker. And he's like, holy shit, have a painting. Tell me the story. So I'm going to drop LaVey's name to Forrest Ackerman. And I do. And he's like, I think he's going to be shocked because I say Church of Satan and all that stuff. He's like, I know, Anton. We used to go out with L. Ron Hubbard, me, and him, and we'd talk about how we were artists then. None of us had anything going. We were trying to figure out where we would fit in and how we would survive as artists. And I remember hearing L. Ron talk about he was going to make a religion, and Anton LaVey said, that sounds like a good idea, and I went and created sci-fi. And so I was like, wow. That's the meeting of minds, like the Church of Satan, Scientology, and sci-fi were at one table as they're stewing these ideas are coming to fruit in this meeting.
When you mentioned those 3 things, I drew a circle mentally of those 3 making into this like Illuminati circle like thing. This sounds like a senile person's ramblings that, L. Ron Hubbard and I had a meeting with Anton LaVey. Or it sounds like, when kids play with their toys and they have, Batman is having a tea party with Barbie kind of thing. It sounds like that when you say it. But I've lived in LA. I've hung out with all kinds of weird circles of unlikely folks. And I'll say that if you've ever worked in entertainment and lived in Los Angeles, you will hear conversations like this. And it's a dying dialogue. It's not happening so much anymore because you can tweet anyone now. You can talk to anyone. So for this to happen in 2006, this is about the time period of pure randomness in Los Angeles for sure.
Right. And I believed him. Like, as an interviewer, a lot of times I'll take some people like, there's a half that's true and a half that's a lie, and I can't figure out which is which, but let's go with it. And so that's how I would see things often with that. But with Forey, I don't doubt him at all. I think that what he was saying, it was like, you couldn't make that one up. Dude. I guess you could, but that is just so fucking surreal and bizarro world that I believe it.
I believe it too. And again, why would you lie about that is one of the most common things I heard in my 20s in LA was, why would anyone lie about that? And then it turns out to be true. And then I think a lot of America is kind of catching up to this right now.
Right, and with Forrest, it was like he answered. I'm there, so I'm breathing this answer in. I'm seeing it happen, so I can gauge truth or honesty. I'm looking at him, and he answers like this. He's a 90-something-year-old man that is actually shitting the bed, so he's not as quick as you'd think. And he goes, boom, like he was he was in a time machine. He just told a memory out of nowhere. It was like boom. It was that rapid, and so I was like, I believe him. It's based on the smell, the look, all of that.
So we've mentioned before another humble brag was your interview with Anton LaVey Folks, if you haven't heard this, this is episode 3 of our season 1 of Speak of the Devil podcast. And it's by far one of my favorite past episodes, and I do re-listen to it every once in a while. If you've never heard this one, Shane's experience, I apologize for the airplane flying above. That's L. Ron Hubbard, Forrest Ackerman, and LaVey flying together in that jumbo jet.
I like your dad joke. It's L. Ron Hover.
And LaVey, Shane's encounter with LaVey is absolutely excellent. A definite listen. It should be our most listened to episode, and it's slowly creeping up, but let's make that our most listened to episode rather than the one that is. So, briefly, tell me about some of the things you asked LaVey during this interview.
Well, it's on the Church of Satan website. And I know it's hard. The memory is a hard one, but it was about Might is Right often. Mm-hmm. But I can't remember the questions in detail, but I remember one of his answers that bothered me was he was like, he'd like to see a police officer on every corner. And I was like, ooh, that's not for me, dude. Like, I don't agree with you there. Like, no way. I'm of a different mind. And I do find some people in Satanism are about control and some people are about
he was an adamant lawman. Yeah,
but law and having cops on every corner is so far. I don't know. That's a far. That's an escalation into militaristic shit. Like
it's a little bit frightening when you put it into perspective, especially right now. And I think that it may have, like, how old was he? He was over 70 when you interviewed him, right? So it's also an older man from 2 generations before you.
Right.
And someone who doesn't like how the world is changing, perhaps. And I think that you get to a certain age where you think that authority will control everything. Think of the control that was allowable. You could get the cops to control your children in his day. You can, there's a lot of elements of control that disappeared that he was accustomed to for a long time. So I would excuse a lot. I don't excuse the view because I don't like that view at all. But at the same time, I think that I understand why he would say that. It doesn't mean I agree with it.
So LaVey controlled the interview. When I went there, the episode we spoke of is basically about my experience at the Black House with him. But he would not, and I think I spoke of this, he asked me to transcribe the interview, write the interview as we were doing. I'm like, I'm not doing that. So we agreed that I would fax him the questions. And I think I talked about this in the other episode.
Yes.
I faxed them the questions and they faxed back the answers. So they were very controlled about it. And that's fine. I got an interview with LaVey, the last. People would call it the Mike Cunt curse because I get the last interview with him, Dana Plato. I forget who else now.
Was Gigi Allen one of your last ones?
Yes. So Gigi Allen was the last one.
Let's talk Gigi Allen.
Oh, God. Well, that was a great one because he would call my house every day, all the time from a jail cell. He was in jail for, I forget what, but he was in a Wisconsin jail for 2 years. And he would call me collect all the time. And it was very expensive. And it was in Addison, Illinois. And all these it's suburban, so it's a different culture. And they're like, Gigi Allen was not known then. He was not known. He was just underground in zines. So they were like, is that the guy who's shitting on himself? He's the guy who shits? Like,
it's sort of your generation's version of, I heard that Marilyn Manson removed his 2 ribs to suck his own dick.
Yeah. So he had, and so when he would call the house, they would be like, fucking this freak is on the phone for you.
He's doing a handstand and shitting all over his face.
Yeah, right. So they were always like, don't invite him here. Don't invite him here. I'll fucking kill him. All this weird shit. And it was cool to talk to the Gigi because he had an opinion. He had a vision he was trying to put forward. And he was an artist. And so it was neat. It was really cool to talk to him. And it was neat to talk to him off of the interview too, because I remember he's like, Shane, why don't you come to the show? When he got out of jail, he'd invite me to his shows and stuff, and I'd never go. And he's like, why don't you come and hang out with me? I'm in town. I'm in town for 2 weeks in Chicago. And I'm like, dude, Gigi, during one of the interviews, you said, you get close to the Gigi fire and you get burned. And I don't want to get burned. I don't want to get close to the Gigi fire, bro. And I'm afraid you might not have washed your hands after shitting and throwing it and stuff like that. So I'm just going to stay here and we can be friends. And he's like, oh, that's cool. I understand. But he talked like that when he was talking to me. But when he's doing an interview, he's like, he was the Gigi. You get close to the Gigi fire and you get burned. And then when we're done interviewing, he's talking normal. And so I relate to that now because I scare people. So because of my history, I guess. So I'll say, hey, you want to hang out? I'm not going to comment publicly, but I'll write you an email about this. Don't let anyone see my email. I'll get emails like that, or people are afraid to hang out with me publicly because they don't want that to be projected onto them. They don't want to be.
We've talked about Twitter, how you get instant, DMs, IMs, whatever it's called. We're old. You'd get private messages through social networking, but no one wants to like your remarks. No one wants to comment back.
Right. They don't want to be associated. And it's a weird thing because back in my day, that was the same kind of the fear. We talked about this earlier, like the energy where you were talking about, no, I think people are afraid of answering questions or afraid of what will be, how the conversation will go. And I think the energy of fear leads us a lot. We just don't realize it makes a lot of our decisions for us. And so I think back in my day, pornography was held at little huts, like called porn shops and stuff like that. And so it was a place where you'd go park in the back to buy your porn. It was always something that you didn't want anyone to know about. And so it's the same, like you don't want to associate with these things. And which is what I fight against with what I do is one of the reasons I do what I do is like, I'm trying to bring down some of those bullshit morals that are impressed upon us. In this culture, it's like people shouldn't be ashamed of their sexuality or going to a porn shop. That's fucking weird that you're, afraid to let people know about it. But it's understandable as well. It is understandable because it is held against you. But when yourself is held against you, no matter what it is, from skin color to sexuality to any, philosophical beliefs, it is illegal in our country, and it's just plain fucking ignorant. Like, it's just, to me, ignorant. It's just ridiculous. I think, like, when I go to a therapist, I don't care if they're Christian. I care if they're a professional. So I'm able to say, are you a Christian? If you are, I don't want to hear Christian stuff. And if you're a science-based therapist, we can go. If not, so I don't mind their philosophical pursuits or anything else. I just mind that they're professional,
Definitely.
Your results and your talent should speak for yourself, stuff like that, versus all these weird things that basically only play out in your home.
So some results and talents within a porn shop you could find is Seika. We've mentioned Seika before, but I want to bring her back and talk about, you have some other firsts we talked about Forrest Ackerman, we talked about John Sinclair, and now here we are with Seika, the first true porn star. What makes someone a porn star?
Well, for Seika, she was the first person that they coined the word porn star.
So it's not necessarily the adult film industry, but rather the title of porn star you're talking.
Yeah, they coined that title porn star for her. Today, everyone that does porn is called a porn star.
Which is absolutely no.
Right, exactly.
I disagree with that. Porn star is like the titles for a cult following, like how Elvira is as a hostess, or a wrestling, like Hulk Hogan is to wrestling.
Right. And so Seika was the first woman who was like in porn who wasn't ashamed of it, was like, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to exploit it for the maximum dollar. So she would do porn and sell it out of her trunk. She'd go to places where there were men and pop open the trunk of her car and sell her videos. She would sell dirty panties. She really she really used it. She got out there and would do as many photo shoots as she could. She was like the model, the fetish models of today. Like they're like, yeah, I want to shoot. I want to shoot. I want to shoot. Seika was in every magazine. She would do covers of magazines. She would work out deals like, I'll trade, we'll do a film right now. She just need to keep working. So she would do a film with someone and they couldn't pay her. So she would just take a bunch of videos, throw them in her trunk and sell them. So she was a hardworking person who marketed herself, had advertising in adult magazines. And I wrote to two people when I was younger. I wrote to David Lee Roth and I wrote to Seika when I was 13 and I asked him to help me get laid.
Did Diamond Dade write you back?
No,
oh.
Neither did Seika. But Seika said, when I met her and talked to her, she goes, I've got your letter probably somewhere in these boxes. I've saved every one. And she goes, one day I'll go through them. But I'm like, yes, could you please, whatever. I forget what I wrote, but I was definitely looking for that. And I was like, or if you can't help me there, if you can't hook me up, I would love a signed pair of your dirty panties. So whatever. Whatever you're listening, I'm just being honest. This is the way it is. So when I'm interviewing Seika and I'm hanging out with her for days, weeks at her penthouse. And she owned a lot of realty at this point when I met her. That's how she made a living. She invested her porn money in realty, which most porn folks don't.
Porn star turned slumlord.
Right. So Seika goes, I go, so about the dirty panties, tell me about that industry. How'd you produce so many panties? Because she's like, I sold 10,000 pairs. And she shows me, she has this machine that would duplicate Polaroids. So she'd take one Polaroid of herself with the underwear and it would duplicate it whenever she got an order. And then she would put fish oil on the panties. It wasn't her panties. It was like this fish oil. And she would put that on there and send them to people. I was like, oh, my God, you had a whole industry.
I've heard of tuna juice.
Right,
tuna juice and lemon juice is another combination often used to manufacture that smell. And I can't help but feel like it probably came after Seika. So fantastic.
Yeah. Oh, God, what a funny time. That she was letting me go through her closets. Here's one. So I'm freaked. I'm going through her closets and I'm bent over, going through things and moving the boxes. And she grabs me by the hips. And I'm like, what in the fuck? And right away, a porn is going off in my head. Like, dun, 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 and I was too shy to make a move. But I almost swear, she grabbed me by the hips and held them. And that's not something people normally do to each other. I think it might have been a sign. Damn, I wish I would have acted.
That music playing in your head, was it Sanford and Son? Because that sort of sounded like da 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 da. Or was it more like a waka chicka kind of sound?
It's waka chicka. You're right. Hold on, Sanford and Son. You're absolutely right. Which is one of my favorite shows.
Sanford and Son, a little weird porn at a junkyard in Watts.
That's me.
Fuck me on the Watts Tower.
It was just an era song. Like during Sanford and Son, you had this. You're right. I couldn't pick out the right tune.
Or whatever it is.
My 70s music file and Sanford and Son came out. Boy, you've got an ear, Nan.
So I'm gonna now. Before we say goodbye to Seika's time, what did you guys talk about when you interviewed her?
All the stuff I was talking about just now, like her start, why she would do this, where the porn star name came from. And then at one time I said something about how do you continue to look so young and beautiful? Because she did. And she's like, oh, come on my face. I rub it into my face. A lot of people think that's a joke, but come on your face is really good. It's the best probably skin cream you can come across.
It's probably better than Pond's.
Well, that's what her take was. And she wasn't kidding. She wasn't doing it to be outrageous. She was telling me the truth. And she lived in Chicago for a long, long time. And so that was really neat to be able to go hang out with Seika here and there.
That's quite an interesting beauty secret as well for someone, someone, I would call her a witch. She definitely was ahead of her time. She was comfortable with herself, pro-sex. She lived for herself. She was a working, career woman. So Why don't we talk more about Seika?
Indeed. I don't know why she's not held to the highest regard,
But people
especially in the
hold
sex
to a
business.
regard Betty Page, who was sort
Yeah.
of boring. How interesting.
Seika was very empowered and empowering. She was all that, and she was one of my mentors because not only did I get to interview her, but once in a while she'd call me and say, "Hey, kids, you want to go out to eat?" And we'd go out to an Italian. She loved Italian food, and we'd
Nice.
go out to an Italian restaurant and we'd hang out. And she liked talking to me, and I liked talking to her. So we would hang out once in a while. So it was a really neat relationship, and it's like how lucky I felt about that. Like she would give me advice, and boy, I don't understand why she's not more spoke about anyway as well. I don't understand it as well, but
Fantastic. I'm very blown away. All these different pioneers you've spoken to. I feel like we got through the biggest names. I have a few of them. I'm just going to go through a list we're going to talk about. And then, just for all of you, we're going to do a credit roll. And then I've got 20 questions of my own for you. We're going to do a very Shane-tastic interview afterwards.
Wow.
So, I'm just going to say these things. Jay Lynch.
Jay Lynch, he started Underground Comics basically with R. Crumb. He Garbage Pail Kids that you probably everyone knows. He created those and was a beautiful man. The one thing in an interview he told me is pussy juice is the best thing to make an etching with. I don't know if that's true, but that's what Jay said. And Jay was not a dirty person like that. He was not obscene. It was so wild to hear him say that. I was like, holy shit, dude. But that's how underground artists are. They say stuff provocative. Crumb had used the N-word a lot in his cartoons, but it was to mirror. But he's not a racialist. He's not at all. He was.
It's just a punctuation.
He was using it because he was upset by it. So these were upsetting. Underground Comics, when they started, dealt with upsetting topics that no one would talk about. Taboo.
Ken Nordine.
Oh, Ken Nordine. Holy moly. He's the voice. And it was great because I wish I had that interview. Jay Lynch's and his are stuck in divorce hell, and I probably will never see them. But I hope one day they'll come out like, after I'm dead, how that works, where we found these tapes of this, we found this hard drive with these interviews on them, and it's Jay Lynch and Ken Nordine. But Ken lived in Chicago, and I didn't live in Chicago at the time, but he had his phone number listed. So I was able to call him whenever I wanted. And I'd call him and ask him for an interview. He's like, I don't know. And I'd call him a couple days later. I don't know. And then finally said, yeah, give me a call. And so I started calling him anytime I had a question philosophically. And Ken Nordine was philosophical. That motherfucker was a trip. He thought large. And when he spoke, it was just like that. I'm Ken Nordine. But I can't do an imitation. No one can. And when he spoke, though, it was like he did word jazz. And it was just like that. So I was able to call him. He's like, I'm about to eat, Shane. Can you call me back in a half hour? And I would, and then he'd answer the question. So I sort of took advantage of that in a weird way. I was stoned all the time, and I'm like, I'm just going to call Ken Nordine and ask him what he thinks, because I need to know about this. What do you think about politics? What do you think about voting? What do you think about this, Ken? I'm having trouble with this. Can you help me? And so I just took advantage of him answering the phone and picking up the phone all the time and answering me every time I asked him a question, which was beautiful to me.
He is one of the few jazz-related artists that I have interest of or care for. I'm not a fan of jazz, but Ken Nordine and word jazz is quite fascinating. It really expands the English language the way that Shakespeare did, and he paints the English language, which even comparing to Shakespeare, that was pretty basic of me just now, but the English language is quite bland sometimes, and I think that ways of painting with the English language helps us evolve as a language and pushes it to be a more beautiful language, whereas, we don't really put it in a form of beauty. While we have a lot of interesting ways of using it, it's quite to the point and crude compared to other languages that are often seen as artful or beautiful, such as Italian, French, etc. And so it's quite interesting what he's done. If kids, if you don't know who Ken Nordine is, look him up and look at the old pictures of him with the glasses while you listen to him, because it just fits. The face fits the voice.
He's also collaborated with Shellac. I forget his name now. Boy, he's a Chicagoan too. The guy who runs Shellac, audio producer. Damn, I can't believe I forgot his name, because he's like did a Nirvana album. He's like one of the greatest producers ever. Fuck, I gotta search it.
Are you talking about Steve Albini?
Yep, that's it. Steve Albini. That's my boy. I can't remember his name. That's my boy. Yeah. So Ken Nordine did that. And I went to see Shellac in Oregon, and they were answering questions from the audience and stuff like that. And then after the show, they were selling t-shirts off the stage. And I go, I have a question for you, Steve. How was it like working with, and the band looks like, come on, come up with the lame Kurt Cobain. Because, he worked with Kurt Cobain. Yeah. And I'm like, Ken Nordine, and all of their faces lit up because no one fucking knows.
Right, everyone asked the same question.
How was it like working with Ken Nordine? They were all excited, and he was like so stoked to answer. He's like, Ken Nordine, I just called him and asked him. He's like, yes, give me a call back. I'm like, he did the same to me.
All right, the last unpublished that I have here is Prison from Prison. What is Prison from Prison?
Prism?
I think
Prism from Prison,
yes.
Yeah. Varg Vilkernes.
Oh, Burzum.
Prism, yeah.
I misheard you when we were planning on this episode, and I heard Prison from Prison, and it sounded like some weird Starlight Express 70s band. So, Burzum, the church burners.
Yes, and Varg, and talking to him about how he didn't like Satanism. It was a white thing, and he's into his culture. It's a commercial thing, and his isn't. He's into, I don't know what he's into.
He's into vegetables.
He is. He's into a lot of. He's all his own. He's a real original dude. He's a character. I would suggest finding him on video and stuff, because he's just I don't know. I really like him as an artist. I understand he has some problems.
But after you see that, kids, watch Lords of Chaos. But after you see the actual Varg.
Right. He has some problematic things going on. But also, like when Varg got out of prison, and this motherfucker escaped from prison once and then goes back and gets out. I mean, that's the deal. So after he gets out of prison for murder, he moves to France. And just because he's him and has an opinion, at some point, the French police break down his door and were holding guns to him, his children, his wife, and, brought him to court. I think he eventually won that. But I felt so strongly opposed to that. I was like, this guy is doing nothing wrong but continuing to communicate his opinions. And if you present him as that dangerous, it gives him validity. It gives him his wacky ideas of validity that you don't want.
He wants to be infamous.
Right. And I was like, why would you do this in that way? Like, first of all, he didn't deserve to be picked on for saying something. And second of all, you are fucking creating exactly what he wants. Let's not make that stuff valid. Let's just make it one person's opinion.
We're seeing this on Twitter and the YouTube now. This phenomena, it's just not as physical.
What is it? How do you
sticking to your guns, believing what saying what you say, and then the internet turns and scowls at you.
Yeah.
Every move you make after that point is a bad move. You are always going to be a bad guy in their eyes unless you have a certain air of clout, privilege, or come out with a shitty documentary.
This is great to speak in today's terms, because I was trying to put why give Vlad a platform? Why give him a platform more than he already has? He has, a handful of people that love him or find him entertaining. But why break down his door and have the whole of France looking at him and reading his work? Why do that? And
Like shaming someone into silence.
but he's a church burner and a murderer. You're not going to be able to stop him. He's not shamed into anything. And it was funny after Lords of Chaos came out. I have to admit I laughed because Varg at the time had an Instagram account and he posts videos and stuff like that. And he's like, my side of the story is this. Basically, I defended myself. I killed him because he was going to kill me. And he said, basically, when you're in underground and you say, hey, dude, you want to kill me and I want to kill you, let's chill out. I said that. He didn't chill out, so I killed him. And I was like, in a biker culture, an underground culture, I can understand what he's saying. Like, hey, we're about to go to war. We don't want deaths. Let's not do this. But when he says it on Instagram, not a lot of people understand that culture. So they're like, what?
They're freaked out. They're either upset or they laugh about it because they can't imagine it.
Right. And so he got pulled off of Instagram. Everyone's, however you would communicate it today, everyone red flagged him or whatever, where he's been pulled off of all the platforms because they call him a Nazi and stuff like that, which I don't know if he is. That never came up in an interview.
But he's not burning churches and killing people right now. And as that's kind of a divisive thing to remark, but
what he does now is he tells people they need to get back to canning their food. They need to do what their grandparents did because their parents didn't teach them how to can their food. They need to know how to survive. They need to be physically active. They need to be smart. So that's what I hear him saying now. It
kind of reminds me of Charles Manson's Atwa and a lot of his own belief. They're quite similar to each other.
Oh, exactly. It's this hard person that's looking at how can we better humanity and making mistakes and having fucked up ideas, but their intent is, I want progress. I want progress versus I want regress.
It's sort of like the branching of, well-intentioned forms of animal humane society into PETA, into ALF, and then Varg. Like it branches from things like PETA into either animal liberation, terrorism, or Varg. He's somewhere in there.
And most people won't talk about PETA's platform. They want all house pets killed.
Correct.
They're in their platform. They do not agree with pets. So they are of a stance that you should not be able to own a pet. And those pets,
they will also take them from you and kill them. I hear.
Yeah, domesticated animals should be put down. And so it's like, why doesn't it? But people just deal with the marketing of PETA, and Varg's marketing is, I burn churches and I've murdered a guy. So it's a hard thing for people to get past, is the church burning.
Correct. Another controversial one that you had experience with was, did you call Secret Service?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But I got back to Varg real quick. I'm just going to say this real quick. He represented my culture. Like Varg represented this angry white male thing. So I was very interested in him. The Secret Service, yes. It was on the Radio Jihad that I did with Doug from the Satanic Temple. And the whole Radio Jihad was about conservatives taking away our rights. So it was like we were talking about how to have an abortion if you want one and they can't give it to you. Like, here's this certain seaweed you use or this. So there was these herbal abortion tactics that I remember Doug would read. And then at some point we were debating on how can you talk about in art hurting the president without it being illegal. And so we would have this debate, and I'm like, hey, there's a play going on in New York that says, shoot the president or whatever. And so I called the Secret Service right there. And the guy's like, I'm like, so in art, in free speech, how can we say these words without getting investigated? Just uttering those words will get you investigated. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm not uttering the words. I'm asking you a question. And I'm not saying those words, and I have no intent of that. I just want to know what that means to you. How can you communicate it in art? And he's like, I'll have to call you back. And he called back.
He called you back.
Oh, yeah. He had to look up the thing because we cited some things in the law books that he didn't understand. Like, well, we have the right to do this. This is the law, this, and this is the law about endangering the president. So we read that in detail, and it's interpreted to us this way. So we should be able to say this without problem. And so he calls back. But here's the weird, you could say coincidence or conspiracy. So this is the early days of the internet, yo. No smartphones, nothing. I have cassette players plugged into amplifiers, plugged into huge speakers, plugged into microphones. It's my podcasting setup is on an 8-foot table. That's how big it was to podcast and stream. And we did make MP3s for people to download, but we were streaming. So when he called back, all of our shit went down. The recording, the computer went, it was like boom. And I was like, holy fuck. So I had to plug my cassette recorder was there just in case. So I hit record, like you press these two buttons down and a recorder starts, and I had to grab a microphone and put it in the speaker there to get that last part. It was like, holy shit.
Wow.
Yeah, it might have been a coincidence, but it was a coincidence that freaked us out.
It's interesting that, except for my conversations with you, my interviews with you, I've heard the story, yet somebody else got credit for a similar stint in her quote-unquote art that bumped her off of TST as a spokesperson.
Oh, Jex Blackmore, right.
Mm-hmm.
And they took this right from my experience.
We know who she got the idea from, totally. But while we're dancing around the kingdom of the Aryan king, let's talk about our last one here, because it's still somewhat of a relevant thing. Is you spoke at one point to Edwin Kagan.
Oh yeah, Edwin Kagan. He was a lawyer for the American atheists, and I stayed with Edwin Kagan for over a week at his beautiful place in Kentucky. And he had a beautiful wife and beautiful family and a big fucking salad bowl full of high-end chocolate bars that I had access to anytime I wanted. Wow. And Edwin Kagan taught me how to fry fish in a cast iron pan. And he paid me $200 to go to the Creationist Museum and interview them. And we did. And that was a wild interview. And that's available on A Year at the Wheel on YouTube. And Edwin Kagan and me were great friends. We stayed in touch because we had a debate. Oh, we had a debate on his radio show. I wish we could find the audio. But Edwin Kagan's a fucking lawyer. And so we had a debate about voting. And I was non-voting at the time. I was against voters. I was like, if you participate in the system at all, you're a piece of shit. I didn't say it like that. But I was dead set against it. And he had his whole crew of American atheists in there, his producer. And then there was a lot of young kids that looked up to Edwin, like about my age or younger. They all sided with me. They were like, yeah, what Shane's saying is cool. I won the debate. I won the fucking debate. Or I at least gave Edwin blows that he was like, he had to step back and come back with an argument. I shouldn't say I won. Neither of us won. Edwin won because it's right. He's right. You should vote. But I stood my ground, and I was surprised because I was so nervous going into this conversation with a fucking lawyer, a wizard, grand poobah motherfucker, like gonna lay down a smackdown on me. And I was able to stand my ground culturally and all that stuff. But a lot of the stuff I said then, I don't agree with today. I vote, and I don't agree with that. We should have a regular Joe in office. A plumber shouldn't be running for president, probably. You know.
We live and learn. And it sounds like you've definitely lived and learned during your career as an interviewer. You told me before we recorded this that you saw interviewing as an art form, and I can't help but agree with that.
Yeah, it is, especially if you take it in more than a way of a narcissistic way, or it's just about you interviewing them, as you do. You have a book full of notes. You take everything you do seriously. And I think that's maybe one of the slivers that makes artwork, is you take it seriously in a ridiculous way, maybe, but in a nonsensical seriousness, I guess. And that, I know that makes no sense, but it makes sense. That's how art is. How's that? And yeah, interview is an art form. And yeah, it is. It's like you have to have. There's a passion there. If you want someone that you're talking to be passionate and give their feelings and talk to you about things from their heart. You have to come into the situation passionate. And I think you have to want, not just be. And a lot of people that interview talking heads, what you see on TV or TMZ or on all that shit, is people who just want. Or they're there. They don't want. They just be. They're there as, I'm a talking head, and I've got these 5 questions that were given to me by my boss, and we're trying to get a certain thing, and we'll get it in editing. We'll trap you with an edit or an interview. But we want feelings. We want to feel the person. We want to present them and project them as they gave us what sliver of themselves they chose to share with us and were generous with.
Shane, I thank you sincerely for, yet again, a lot of your generosity. From this talking head to all of you, thank you so much for listening. Stick around for after our credit roll, and we've got a fun, silly interview of some questions that I never thought I would ask Shane, but here we go. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe and tune into our next episode wherever you prefer to listen to podcasts. You can find us at Speak of the Devil Pod on Twitter and contact us at speakofthedevilpod@gmail.com. For Shane's artwork or to support his endeavors, please visit ShaneBugby.com or find him on Twitter at ShaneBugby. I've been Nannerl. Have a good one.
Oh, and ShaneIsTheDevil.com.
All right, Shane, here's the interview that we all were waiting for. Question number 1, I'm just going to go through these, try to answer them as briefly as you can, as quickly as you can. 20 questions, here we go. What is your favorite meat to put in a taco?
Oh, you. I would say right off the top of my head, ground beef, because it's just the white boy stuff that we got on a hard shell and, those Taco Bell shells. But ground beef. That's my go-to.
Hagar or David Lee Roth?
Oh, David Lee Roth.
Sweet or salty?
Oh, both.
What's your favorite ice cream?
I mean, both at once.
What's your favorite ice cream flavor?
Pistachio gelato.
What is your ideal pizza toppings and crust and setting all together?
Well, thin crust, Chicago thin crust, Chicago sauce, Chicago pizza. I would say basically just garlic, roasted garlic and cheese is probably my go-to. That's what I love. And of course, once in a while I go to pepperoni. If it's on top, if you put pepperoni under the cheese, fuck you.
Star Trek or Star Wars?
Star Wars.
Favorite vegetable?
Broccoli.
The best Metallica album?
Oh, first Kill 'Em All.
Favorite color?
Pink.
What is the worst taste you can have?
Worst taste? Good taste.
Good taste, all right. What's the worst smell you can think of?
Oh, why did you say this? Oh, goodness. A bathroom that hasn't been cleaned in a long time. Like if you're on the road and you go to this bathroom, you walk in there, it's like, holy fuck, peeing in here is going to give me a disease. I definitely can't shit in here. Like it's just like an outhouse or something like that. That's the worst. I hate even bringing it up.
Soft or firm bed?
Well, mine is pretty firm. Yeah, firm.
Favorite season of the year?
Oh, spring.
What is the worst movie you have ever seen?
Oh, Apollo 13 with Tom Hanks, and I walked out of it. I was in Hollywood. I go to the theater. Oh, we're going to see on the big, hugest screen they have in the world in Hollywood. Going to go see this space movie. Go in, and it starts, and it's like in 10 minutes, I'm like, I'm getting the fuck out of here. Fuck this thing. So there you go. The worst movie I've never seen, I walked out of.
What has been your favorite decade to be alive?
Oh, right now. Right now, I love today. I love today. I love all of my decades. It's hard. I would say now or my childhood. You know, when I was a young boy riding a bike, innocent, and now as I'm feeling free and happy, like what I'm facing in my future is going to be my favorite, no matter what. The next thing you know, I lose a leg.
If you could choose any time period to live in any country, what would you choose?
Okay. So can I say, I would say 2050, 2050.
Uh-huh.
And I'm okay with America. It's just the politicians I don't like. I think America's pretty cool. I've never been to any other countries, so it's anything else would be fantasy. I've been to Canada.
All right. If you could be any fictional character, TV, books, comics, whatever, what fictional character would you take their place?
Oh God, I want to say Bruce Lee, but he wasn't fictional. I guess Darth Vader. To be honest, that's the guy I've always wanted to be like. You can lift someone up by your fuck, like, just like, and I think Darth would be very cool. Just don't fuck up his hot cocoa. Don't fuck things up. Like, just, no, Darth is here and he's critical. And he'll choke you out with his mind,
If you could, sorry. When you go to the grocery store, what is the first thing you grab?
Oh boy. Well, I guess it depends. No, it doesn't depend. It's
What department store is the first one you go to? There we go.
If I go to a grocery store, it's the deli. I go to the deli. And so I go there all the time. I can't get away from the deli.
What is your first choice toothpaste?
Arm & Hammer with baking soda.
And finally, if you could eliminate one thing from life, what would it be?
Mental pain. Mental pain, mental health, mental illness.
Thank you for completing this questionnaire. Have a good one.
Thank you.